Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. Although technology automation is being touted as the next pivotal step for Treasury groups to maximize efficiency, such initiatives only work if the proper internal structure and workflows are established prior to implementation. On this episode of the podcast, Jeffery sits down with Lee-Ann Perkins, Assistant Treasurer at ION Geophysical, to discuss how to modernize Treasury operations as she details her journey working for a global geoscience company. Tune into the discussion.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Jeffery, and today's episode is Modernizing Treasury, Restructuring and Using Automation. It's an interview with ION Geophysical, and I'm here with Lee-Ann Perkins. Lee-Ann Perkins is the Assistant Treasurer of ION Geophysical. I'll probably refer to it as ION Geo. Just some information about ION. They are a firm that's just under $500 million. They're publicly traded. They have significant international operations, and they operate as a geoscience and seismic solutions provider. They have over 50 years of service and about 500 employees. So welcome to the podcast, Lee-Ann.
Thank you, Craig. I'm excited to be here. I love to talk all things Treasury, so thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure to have you on. So I wanted to begin talking about the restructuring that you did in 2018 and then move on to the technology automation initiatives. I just wanted to hear what's gone on in the organization over time. There's been a lot of changes in your industry. Maybe you could just give some background on the industry, what's causing those changes, and then we can talk about what's gone on with Treasury in more detail.
Sure. So ION Geophysical, as you had mentioned, is a software company in the geophysical space. We're a company that excels in leveraging innovative technologies, and we translate raw data into actionable insights with the prospect of delivering superior returns. So my goal in the Treasury Department is to do just that with financial data. And so the first step for the department to meet these company goals was to ensure that the structure of the department followed the strategy. And in doing so, we had an opportunity to have some treasury restructuring. So although we're a medium-sized company, we have great international reach, and our treasury department faces off to many operational and supporting units around the company. I came to the company about 15 months ago now, and when I started, I worked on a roadmap to try and move the department from more of a developing sort of cost center advisory role to one that's value adding to the department. And my goal for our department is to become a useful internal partner to the business. And we had most of the cash reporting, operational duties, forecasting duties being done in the United Arab Emirates. And that was really just due to the historical structure of the company at the time. We had a large oil boom in that area, and the structure followed the money at that point. And then, as we all know, since about 2014, the oil industry took a bit of a turn, and that caused a lot of the work to move away from that geographical area and eventually the office size strength. So we were left with one key employee in Dubai, and she had been with the company for many years and decided that it was time for her to move on. And that gave me the opportunity to sort of try to structure the Treasury Department in a way that would really help us to mature as a department. And we had to review a lot of options on where to put these Treasury functions, because they're obviously really important to day-to-day Treasury. And I looked at maybe moving it to the UK, maybe moving it to somewhere else in Europe. But eventually the decision was made to move all that work back to the US. And that eventually became in line with my goal to eventually centralize the Treasury function. So historically, a lot of the work had been done outside of the US, and just because of the way things happened with the oil industry and the key employee leaving, I had the opportunity to bring that back to the U.S.
So, Lee-Ann, the business change obviously created a ripple effect in the organization. So it sounds like you both took advantage of what was going on or leverage what was going on to make another change. So sometimes these challenges or shifts present opportunities or force your hand in a certain way. So it's interesting to see how you moved and brought that back. So what was the advantage of centralizing and bringing it back? I know there was a long trend there for a while to decentralize Treasury in terms of putting people in different locations. Now there's been more of a trend to, put them in one location, whether it's the UK or US or some other location because of different reasons. Any other thoughts on why that made sense to bring the resources into a single location?
Yeah, and like you say, the trend was to decentralize and move things out. So it was a little bit of a hard sell from as a company to try and bring everything back to the US. But we had a lot of opportunities just because of the way the company was running, that we were extremely manual in the processes being done in Treasury. It was taking 3 to 4 days to set cash positions. So we never dynamically had a consolidated cash balance for the company because it just took so long. And we had this one person in Dubai doing it who worked very hard, and it was just a lot of work to actually consolidate cash. So the first benefit to us was just making sure that we could bring the work back to the U.S., there's more people in our Treasury Department in the U.S., and have to spread the load around so that everybody else can help us out to get cash done as quickly as possible in a more dynamically updated manner. And then there was also the time zone. So in Dubai, they're 12 or so hours ahead of us. So it was great that the work was being done before we got to work. But when there were problems or changes or other issues that I had to deal with, I had to bother my employee after hours and during her dinner evening so that I could get the work done. So I think it just became a good use of time and a good use of employee power to bring it back to the U.S. where we're all together. And if we have any questions, we can just literally go to the person next door to help us fix it and to get things done. And then on top of that, we just also reduced the risk of only one person knowing how to set cash, how to do the forecast, how to do the credit applications, and a lot of the operational work that was being done was really being done by one person alone. And this change happened about 6 months after I got to the company. So I wasn't in the opportunity to really know what exactly was going on. So by bringing it back, I had some time to really delve into the work that was being done, how to automate it, how to create efficiencies out of it, and how to spread the workload in the department. So we were reducing that risk of only one person knowing how to do the work.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this already, but Lee-Ann, tell us about the size of the Treasury organization.
So we are a 4-person Treasury organization in the U.S. So we have a treasurer who is my boss. I'm the assistant treasurer. Then we hired another treasury manager to replace the Dubai position. And we have a senior treasury analyst here in Houston. And then around the world, there are treasury functions being done by finance departments. So they're not necessarily standalone treasury departments, but there is treasury work being done in the other 19 countries that we operate.
Right. And working with them requires, coordination, even if they're not a dotted line relationship. After you put this structure in place, I know you then moved to work on treasury automation. Maybe you could just provide some background on what you're using and doing, and then what you've accomplished and what you're in the process of doing.
Sure. So the first real project on my list when I came in and had moved the work back to the U.S. was to look for ways to create efficiencies in the department, because we really needed to free up our time, concentrate efforts on areas that, we could be useful to the company, and we could eventually mature the Treasury Department and one day, in the future become a center of excellence. So part of my focus with automation is ensuring we future-proof the Treasury Department. And so we work in very many different markets around the world, and I'm constantly being asked to work on how do we get projects done in countries we've never worked in before that are difficult countries to get into. How do we, get project financing? How do we get money in and out of the country? So I need to be sure that we can adapt and be agile in these areas. And the first starting point for me was automation. And the only way we can make sure our payments are being done and our cash is consolidated is to get a Treasury Workstation. So that's the very first automation project we're working on. We are very close to selecting and signing off on the Treasury Workstation for to start this year. And one of the key goals of getting this workstation is to make sure that we're actually buying what we need. We are price sensitive, being a smaller company, so I had to make sure in order for my bosses to buy this project, that we could buy a project that we could afford and that we would be getting exactly what we're asking for, and it would address the business needs and the challenges that we're currently facing.
So what, as you looked at Treasury Management System, what were the functions you wanted to start with?
The first automation project that we were looking at is the Treasury Workstation that only the Treasury Department would be involved with at first. And it would consist primarily of bank connectivity through SWIFT for cash management and cash consolidation and cash reporting. And this would be for all our companies around the world. We have 19 bank relationships that we work with. So trying to get all of these bank balances and reports into a workstation was key for us. And then eventually we will move on to adding a little bit more compliance and risk management modules such as the FR and bank account management. But the real starting point is to make sure we know where the cash is, what currency it's in, and it has to be there at the right time. So that's the starting point for the Treasury Workstation.
Not to take a side trip away from the tech, but I think it's worth pointing out the complexity that you have as a, under $1 billion turnover firm. You've got 19 bank relationships. You're in a number of countries in at least 3 regions of the world. You're dealing with commodity related activity and other types of risk. So some organizations that might be 10 or 20 times your size might have the same level of complexity. Their dollar volume might just be larger. So you're working with a small organization. So it seems real wise to make sure both your treasury group and your tech supports that, because you have to use those tools to make up for a small group.
Yeah, that's correct. And, one of the starting points for selling this project to the company was to make sure that the IT department, A, knew how to deal with this type of bank connectivity, and B, that they had the resources to deal with it, because in a smaller company, they're also resource restricted in their department. So the systems that I went after when I was doing RFP and looking for systems was to make sure that it was cloud-based and the PMS company would be able to provide all of the tech resources that I needed, because I was just upfront and honest with them. This is not going to work if our IT department has to be involved. So it's not a hosted solution on our side, because we just are not able to handle that. But yet with the dollar value that we have running through the systems, we still have this many countries and bank accounts and bank relationships as a lot of bigger companies. So it's a bit of a difficult ask for a TMS system, but we did find one that fits our needs.
Yeah. So as you've gone through this process with the requirements that are satisfied through a treasury management system, I know we talked about forecasting before the podcast, and forecasting was a very significant item to your group. Maybe you could talk about what you're doing with regards to forecasting that's not fully within the TMS, and just what led to your thinking on that.
So when I went after a Treasury Workstation, one of my requirements was that we needed a forecasting module. And all the modules that I looked at in the systems that met our needs on the Treasury side could not meet the needs on the forecasting side. So we are a company that operates, I think, a little bit differently to what other Treasury departments do for forecasting. We do receipts and disbursement forecasting, but we also project-based. So all our forecasting, the 32-week rolling forecast, but it is project-related. So we have 14 different, we call them verticals or business units, that report their forecasting to the Treasury Department, and we consolidate that. And this is an extremely manual process that takes one person in our department 4 days a week to consolidate. It's the biggest spreadsheet you've ever seen. They constantly crash. We have issues where the units will accidentally insert a column, change a row, change a formula, and it's up to Treasury to make sure we consolidate the data quickly and correctly and have the data that management wants to use, and it's good information for them. So it's a very difficult process for Treasury to do. We also don't own the information that comes from the operating unit. So for us to understand where the error may be is very time consuming to delve into that. So when looking at the Treasury Workstation, I couldn't find any solution that would require not only the Treasury Department to change their processes, but also the operating units. And there is no way I'm able to get 14 different operating units to change their methodology and their processes to accommodate the Treasury Department. So at the AFP conference in Chicago last year, I ran into a company that is able to provide the exact solution that I'm looking for. So we're very close to signing a contract with them. And this is a very unique solution that they're offering, and it's very innovative. It's a system that it's SaaS-based, first of all, so we don't have any IT requirements. But it's a spreadsheet consolidation tool that collects and integrates the information from a variety of sources. So those would be our 14 forecast files, and then create that into a single report and using a real-time algorithm. So it's using APIs, and it's, in the simplest way, it's a pivot table function and not a cell reference function like an Excel spreadsheet is. So if the units make any changes to the structure of the file, it doesn't matter to the consolidation sheet because it's always able to dynamically update that for us, show us where the changes are, and allow us to consolidate this massive 14 spreadsheet process. It's literally a couple of minutes right now, but when it goes into production, it'll probably take us an hour or two a week to complete. So this is going to be the changing point for our Treasury Department and our efficiency.
So are you saying that this consolidation, checking, and validation process, because it took so much time and the spreadsheets were, I'll just say, very involved and created challenges, that you're going to go from about 4 days a week of time doing the consolidation of that information and checking down to a couple hours a week?
That's correct. And we've seen the demos. It's amazing. It's going to free our Treasury Department up to do things that are useful to us.
Yeah, that's about 75% of one person's time. And if you look at a group of 4, that's impressive. So I think I'd like to check back with you to see how it comes in reality. Obviously, there's some tools that help reduce some of the friction, and let's see if you do end up yielding that much of a return from it. But certainly the just checking to make sure it's accurate, if a system manages that part, it makes it easier. But I did want to talk, now that you're going to do that, the forecast is going to come in through that SaaS-based tool. Are you going to pass some of that forecasting information into your TMS, or is that going to stay as a separate system?
It's going to stay as a separate system. We don't have the capability in the workstation that we are purchasing to roll that information in. So in the Treasury Workstation, we'll be more focused on the receipts and disbursement schedule for tasks. And on the forecasting, standalone system will be more for the project-related forecasting needs.
Liquidity scheduling. Okay. Excellent. So as you've gone through implementing technology and planning to implement technology, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned that you would try to help shortcut the learning process with others? What are your top items there?
So we definitely have learned from past mistakes. One of the, I think, key areas for us was to make sure that we limit what we're trying to purchase. We only want the functionality that the Treasury Department is interested in. Sometimes you get blown away by how much a system can do, how much a salesperson is showing you at a conference. It looks amazing. But when you really dig down into what your company needs and what the business need is, you really realize that you don't have to have all the bells and whistles that are being sold if that's not what you are going after. So I think the key lesson was to make sure when I was looking for a workstation that I really knew what I needed. And I wanted to make sure that we only purchased the modules that we were intending to use, because they can come in these big, beautiful systems, but we're not going to be using all those systems. And we made that mistake in the past where we signed a very long contract for many modules. And back in the day when the oil price was booming and the company was great and huge and we could possibly make use of all those modules, it may have made sense at that point. But as the company scaled back, those modules weren't being used and we are still, in fact, paying for them. So the important thing is to know what you want and go after that only. Just be honest with the salespeople. This is what I want. This is what I need. That's all. So limit basically what you're looking for. And then in terms of contract terms, I had mentioned that we are still paying for a contract that we're in for going on 10 years now. So you have to negotiate with the workstation provider that you only want the contract term to be what's available and what's useful for your company. So we've been able to get into a 1-year contract with going forward a month-to-month subscription. And a lot of these new SaaS cloud-based systems are offering that. So I think 10 years ago, that wasn't available. But right now, many providers, particularly the lower-end systems, are able to give you that. And obviously, we don't want to break terms with our workstation provider, but if that should happen, we at least are not signing ourselves up for a 10-year system that we're not going to use. And then the other really important part for us was to make sure, even though it's a lot of work up front for the company, to make sure that we get our own bit. And this helps us reduce risk, because if we do ever part ways with the workstation provider, we have done all the work and we have all our information to move over somewhere else. I think those were key lessons that we learned that we had probably done incorrectly in the past when setting up another system.
So you added your own BIC this past year?
Yeah, we're in the process of doing that.
Excellent, Lee-Ann. I take away from your story and stepping through what went on with the business generally and then what you've done in Treasury is this idea of, instead of being passive to the events that confront the company or that confront Treasury, you were more active and you took advantage of once things started moving, like the law of inertia, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Once things started moving, a person was leaving, there was a shift in the business. You took advantage of that. You were active in it and then, moved the position and put in the right type of technology to fit that state of change. And then obviously you come to a resting point that hits a period of stability. So I appreciate that story. I hope our audience loves the things that you've done and are in process of doing. We'd love to check back with you as you build out the rest of the forecasting tech that you're moving forward on. So thank you for your time, Lee-Ann.
Yeah.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.